It seems like the YouTube productivity space has everyone thinking that if they just use the Pomodoro technique, they'll be able to get straight A's and cure cancer and bring their dead cat back. But I don't buy it. I think there's several problems with this technique that make it so much less productive than people actually think. But before I get into it, if you like videos like this on productivity for college students, you should subscribe because there's going to be a whole lot more videos soon. But for now, let's get into the video. My first and one of the main problems I have with this technique is the fact that you're essentially setting artificial limits on your study session. The first example is a lot of people like to do the 25-5 Pomodoro, or they study for 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break. The problem with this is that 25 minutes in terms of studying is a very short amount of time when it comes to trying to reach a flow state, or a state in which you're very actively locked in on whatever you're studying and just very focused. It takes a decent amount of time to sort of build up that flow state. One example I can think of is, for example, when you're reading a book, for the first couple minutes, it seems a little bit unnatural, especially if you're not used to reading. And it feels like every page is taking a super long amount of time. And then all of a sudden you notice that the pages are just flying by and time sort of just fades away and you're very focused on whatever you're doing. To get into this flow state, it often takes a bit of time, definitely more than 25 minutes. So if I'm setting this 25-minute limit on myself, then it's very easy to study without actually ever getting into a flow state. And aside from the flow state, even if you're just getting solid work done during your work session, if you then have a timer telling you have to end the session, if you're in the middle of something like very productive work, it's gonna feel like a nuisance to constantly have this timer telling you when you're supposed to stop. Because if we're in the middle of a task, it can be very annoying to have to take a break and then pick it back up. We might forget what we were thinking, we might become distracted and have to refocus that attention, and all of that takes time. Now, my second gripe with this technique is that, like I've talked about in other videos, it prioritizes the amount of time spent studying as opposed to the actual quality of the study session. So I've talked about a lot of times that a lot of people conflate productivity with how long they're studying for, and this is a very inappropriate comparison because most likely we could get much better work done if we just spend a couple, hour, 2-hour sessions focused on our work as opposed to drawing it out throughout the course of the day. And I think the one downfall of the Pomodoro technique is that a lot of these videos can be very long. For example, a 7-8 hour study with me. And I think it gets into the minds of students that you're more productive if you're spending more time on your work as opposed to getting good focused work done. And I think unconsciously, by seeing really long videos like this, it sort of convinces people that they have to study until the end or else they're not being as productive as they could be, and that they constantly have to find something to do for those 8 hours. And this can lead to just wasted time because, like I've said before, usually 80% of the results from your studying will come from sort of 20% of your efforts if you think of sort of the Pareto distribution. So a lot of the time we want to focus on main principles and big ideas in whatever we're reading or studying. I think techniques like this, like the Pomodoro, where they sort of incentivize studying for so long, it essentially forces you to grasp for straws at a certain point where you've already done the bulk of the work, but you're still just looking for things here and there to study. So you end up sort of just looking over random tangential information that's not super relevant to whatever you're studying. You're just constantly looking for something new to study, even if it's not super important, because you just feel like you need to fill up your time with more information, even if it's not super relevant. Now, my third problem with the Pomodoro technique is that a lot of people likely use the break wrong. So say you're studying for 25 or 50 minutes, there are different variations, but you're done your study session and you're into the break time. A lot of people will just immediately pick up their phone and start scrolling social media. And the problem with this is the break time in Pomodoro is meant to be a rest for your mind in which you can sort of just wind down after focusing for a while and just relax your brain and refresh yourself before you go into your next session of studying. By just going on your phone and stimulating yourself even more, it prevents your brain from winding down and makes it more likely that you're just going to go into your next session distracted. Because if you imagine you're just scrolling reels and you're looking at all these really silly, entertaining, addictive videos, and then you close your phone and you try to go into another study session, you're most likely just going to be thinking about videos you saw, or maybe there was a story that you were thinking about on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever else. It's very hard to transfer from this dopamine-fueled, very addictive environment of your phone to then going back into another study session where you just have to focus on something that could be very boring for you. It's a lot harder to focus your attention. And like I said in the first problem I had, is that it definitely takes a decent amount of time to actually focus your attention on schoolwork. So if you've been on your phone and then you're only giving yourself 25 minutes again to refocus your attention, it's so easy for you to just work without ever really getting into that true focus. So like I've said, I have a problem with the Pomodoro technique for 3 main reasons. The first one is that you're setting artificial limits on yourself. You can only study for a certain amount of time, but this is a problem if you feel very productive, you're in the middle of some task and the timer is telling you to stop and you don't really feel like doing it. It cuts up your work and distracts you. The second problem is that it incentivizes working for longer as opposed to having more productive study sessions. There comes a time when you're studying for 7 or 8 hours where you essentially are just grasping for straws because you've already studied all the information, but you constantly feel like you should be doing more. And the third problem is that the short breaks that this technique allows for, say 5 or 10 minutes, they're not really enough to do anything productive, and most people will just end up scrolling their phones and overstimulating themselves more and distracting themselves going into their next session. So if this technique is faulty, what would be a better alternative? When I was doing my research for this video and just looking at other videos of people's reactions to the Pomodoro technique, how different people do it to be more or less productive, there was one common theme that I saw over and over again. And it was essentially the idea of doing the Pomodoro technique, taking similar study periods and rest periods, but as opposed to letting the computer arbitrarily decide how much time you're allowed to study for, the main thing that I saw that was making it more productive was when people decided for themselves how long they were going to study. So this usually entailed people working until they felt like they were genuinely getting tired or distracted and that their work was becoming less effective. At that point, they would stop working, look at how long they had worked for, and basically set a break time for themselves that was maybe a fourth or a fifth of the study time. I think this is actually super helpful because it allows you to, again, set your own limits. So if you're very locked into a specific task, you're very focused and you don't want to stop in the middle, you can decide when you want to stop. Whenever you're done a specific task and you feel like a break time would be appropriate, it's your decision to decide when you're done, and then you also decide how long you take the break for based on how long you were studying for. And this gets rid of the first 2 problems for us, the artificial limits and the fact that we were incentivized to study for super long periods of time arbitrarily, because we get to decide how long we're going to study for and make it more suitable for our own needs and our own abilities. Now, the third problem that I think still could be improved on is what we're doing in the break time. I think whatever you do in the break time, you have to make sure it's less stimulating than the actual studying. So if you're constantly focusing your mind and you find that your brain is sort of nodding off and you're getting tired, you have to do something relaxing. You can't constantly overstimulate yourself more because that's just going to make you more distracted going into your next study session. So if we want to look for something relaxing that would sort of wind us down in between study sessions, this would most likely be something like going on a walk, talking with friends, maybe even some deep breathing, meditation, that kind of thing. Anything that's winding our brain down. For the most part, as a general rule of thumb, I would say don't scroll your phone during breaks because this is going to be super distracting and definitely pull your attention away from whatever you're studying. Hopefully you can think about these modifications a bit going into your next study session because I think they make the technique so much more productive. At the end of the day, we want to make sure we're not setting artificial limits for ourselves and we want to make sure we're using our time productively. Now, hopefully you can take something away from this video. If you're here till the end, again, I really appreciate it. If you like videos like this, you should subscribe because there's going to be a whole lot more soon. But until then, I'll see you guys.